Go for it.
Okay. Hello, folks. I'm Davison Koenig, the Executive Director and Curator of the Couse-Sharp Historic Site, a 2.5-acre campus in the heart of Taos that contains the home studios and gardens of E.I. Couse and J.H. Sharp, two of the founders of the Taos Society of Artists, and the future home of the Lunder Research Center, a 5,000 square foot museum facility currently under construction, dedicated to the early art colony and the community of Taos. We would like to acknowledge the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo, on whose ancestral lands we now share. So welcome to the virtual panel discussion for our exhibition, Stitched in Sovereignty, Contemporary Beadwork from Indigenous North America. Thanks for being here. Today's discussion with two of the featured artists, Brit Ellis and Shelby Rowe, will be moderated by Dr. Chelsea Herr. Dr. Herr, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, is a recent doctoral graduate from the University of Oklahoma, where she wrote her dissertation on indigenous futurisms in the work of Native North American artists. She was recently appointed as the Jack and Maxine Zarro Curator for Indigenous Art and Culture at Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was also our amazing intern from the OU Native American Art History program in the summers of 2016 and 2017. And she is the guest curator of our 2020 exhibition, Stitched in Sovereignty, which honors the 50th anniversary of the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo and their fight for self-determination and sovereignty. So please allow me to welcome Dr. Herr.
Thanks, Davison.
My pleasure.
Halito, Sochifoyot Chelsea, Chato Hoyosia. Yakoki, thank you for joining us tonight. As Davison mentioned, the Couse-Sharp Historic Site is situated on the ancestral lands of Taos Pueblo, who this year are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the historic return of their sacred site, Taos Blue Lake, from the United States government. And that was kind of a motivating factor for this exhibition, as a celebration of the many ways in which Indigenous people have been fighting for not only their lands and their systems of governance, but their modes of identifying themselves and modes of cultural expression as well. I'd also like to gratefully acknowledge that I am speaking to you this evening from Tallahassee or Tulsa, Oklahoma, which occupies the current and ancestral land of the Osage Nation and the current lands of the Cherokee and Muskogee Creek nations. I am so excited to introduce you to two of the phenomenal artists who are in the exhibition, Stitched in Sovereignty. While the current global health crisis has meant that there's been restrictions on physically visiting the exhibition at the site, our amazing team has provided beautiful images and information for the show online at stitchedinsovereignty.org. So even though we can't see you in person, we do encourage you to visit the website and the participating artists' websites, which are linked there for you as well. If you joined us for our talk with Molly Murphy Adams and Kellen Trinell Lewis last night, thank you for coming back, for joining us again. And please forgive this brief repetition of information for our new viewers. Stitched in Sovereignty highlights diverse ways in which Indigenous peoples maintain sovereignty over not only their lands and systems of governance, but also their cultures, knowledge systems, and identities. Beadwork itself is a material expression of Indigenous sovereignty. While many Indigenous communities have practiced forms of beadwork for millennia, it was with the importation of European glass beads and steel needles that beading became a transcontinental tradition. Many tribes integrated these trade goods into pre-existing aesthetic and material traditions, which have persisted for nearly 5 centuries. The artists featured in the show continue the innovations of their ancestors in expressing personal and cultural identity, in visualizing intergenerational knowledge, and in maintaining relationships with the peoples and lands that they call home. Through their beadwork, they reassert the inherent right of Indigenous peoples to shape, reclaim, and re-envision what it means to be Native in the United States and Canada today. So our order of topics for this evening, I'm going to give a brief biography for each artist, And then we have some very insightful videos that they were kind enough to record for us to give us some more background on their artistic practice. And then after that, I have a few questions for each artist. We'll look at some images of the works in the show. And then we would love to hear your questions in the audience as well. So if you have anything that you would like us to address, feel free to drop it in the chat or Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can also add a question in the comments there as well. And those will get sent to us. So let's start with Brit. Based in Toronto, Haudenosaunee artist Brit Ellis specializes in weaving traditional beadwork techniques and teachings with modern imagery, materials, and aesthetics. She views her work as an expression of reconciliation and reconnection, speaking to the realities of many Indigenous peoples who are diasporic on their own land, and who have had to find their way home to community one step at a time. So here is Brit's short video.
So, Sego, bonjour, hello. My name is Brit Ellis and my spirit name is Blue Hummingbird. That's the name of my beading business, Blue Hummingbird Beadwork. And I am a Haudenosaunee woman of mixed ancestry living in Toronto, currently with my dog, Morty. Beadwork is an incredibly important practice to me for many reasons, but the most important that also ties into my pieces that are in the exhibit are my ancestors. So the moon is particularly close to me for a number of reasons, and I do a lot of my work around her and the phases and transitions of the moon. But this year in particular has been especially important and especially significant, given all of the change and upheaval. It's been an important reminder of renewal for me. And earlier this year in January, my father passed away, and I was working on my ancestors piece, the large solar system piece. Before he passed away, he was able to see it. And I'd been thinking a lot about Sky World and Star People and all the stories that I've heard from different nations, from my own, and trying to find comfort in faith in the unknown of what's to come and what's bigger and more than ourselves. And that ties in again to why beadwork is so important to me, and it's my ancestors. I feel very, very close to my ancestors and to community when I'm working. I feel like it's an absolute critical cultural connection and lifeline for myself. Beadwork carries thought and feeling and intention, and it's really important to be thoughtful of that when you're creating pieces. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be happy all the time. There's power in processing and harnessing different emotions. And so my sadness and my grief over the passing of my father this year has been incredibly influential in my work. And again, I feel close to him when I'm beading. I feel close to the ancestors I haven't met. I feel them supporting me. It's really helped my independence. It's helped my self-confidence, my strength in knowing that I can get through all of these things that Creator is throwing at me. So that's why it's really important to me. So also about my beadwork practice, I've been beading since 2012. So it's been about 8 years now. And unfortunately, I grew up displaced from community. And my first interaction with beadwork on a creative level, other than observing and adoring it for many, many years, was at a drop-in beading circle when I was in college at the Indigenous Education Service Center at the college that I attended. And I have been beading every single day since then. I've beaded on multiple continents and I've beaded in airplanes. It is a crucial medicine for me. Not only do I feel close to my ancestors and building community and feeling that power and knowledge flow through my hands, but it's also been a way over time where I've been able to financially support myself. And when our craft and our cultural practices, our ceremonies were outlawed, considered illegal in my lifetime, I think it's really important to acknowledge that I'm able to support myself by doing this really important work that, like I said, connects me to community and connects me to culture and is a conduit for all kinds of growth in my life. When my dad was sick, it was the beadwork community that rallied around me, having a raffle, and I was able to make the remainder of his time here with us really special. And I feel held and loved by community and by this work. The work itself, like I said, carries a spirit and carries such significance that it really does care. It really does feel there really is spirit in the work. So that's super important to me and to my practice. And again, I've been beading every day for 8 years. I will bead as creator willing as long as my hands will let me. So I hope that I inspire any other person who maybe identifies with my story, and any other Indigenous person that wants to try their hand at beadwork. There's no wrong way. You can learn so many different techniques. That's what's so incredibly special about it too. I bead in a very unique way. Every artist does. Their work is recognizable and almost impossible to duplicate. And it's because of the spirit. It's because of what you put into that work. So any Indigenous person that wants to try beadwork, I really highly encourage you. And if you can see any of yourself in me, then I've accomplished more than I ever could have imagined. So I really appreciate that. Nyawenkoa for listening and for coming, Chimigwech, for your time and for checking out my work and for your support and for allowing me to do this and create and maintain some kind of a platform to promote other Indigenous artists as well. So thank you so, so much. I really appreciate it.
And our second artist here with us this evening is Oklahoma-based bead artist Shelby Rowe, who is Chickasaw. Shelby is an inspirational speaker, a nationally recognized suicide prevention expert, and a mother of 3 sons. A self-taught beadworker as of 2017, Shelby's beadwork was added to the permanent collection of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian in November 2019. Her work has also been shown at the 2019 Santa Fe Indian Market, the 2020 Herr Museum Indian Art Fair in Market, as well as Take a Seat, a group exhibition of feminist art. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of her award-winning work just after her video, which we can watch right now.
Choma, Sohochapoa, Shelby Rowe, Chikasha Saya. Hello, my name is Shelby Rowe, and I am Chickasaw. And for me, beading means many things. But most of all, I see my beads as little pieces of broken glass. And as I'm sewing them together, I'm mending that brokenness. And just like people can be completely, disorganized, broken, that with love and attention can be mended and transformed into something beautiful. I like doing portraits of people In my world, when I'm not doing art, I work in suicide prevention. So in my profession, I work with mending brokenness, and in my art, that carries over. Also, I am someone with PTSD, and when I started beading, I'm self-taught. I've been beading for only 3 years. I taught myself how to bead, and it is the most effective therapy. It's very grounding. Like, our ancestors knew what they were doing when they came up with beading and other crafts, because you can't focus on the past. You can't focus on the future. You have to stay in the moment and count your beads. And so it's a peaceful time. It allows me to tell stories that I think need to be told. It gives me that venue, and it also gives me time as I'm beading and spending time in that space of learning the stories from my ancestors, because I really do feel that they're with me and they're guiding me as I put together new creations and I mend all the little broken beads together.
So I really appreciate that each of you brought up kind of the restorative qualities of the process of beadworking. I think that is something that very often when we're talking about beadwork, or when it's being discussed in general, that either gets maybe briefly mentioned, if mentioned at all. And I really appreciate both of your insights into it from quite kind of different perspectives, right? And I'm going to share some images of both Brit's and Shelby's work so we can discuss them. Let's see. So one of Brit's works, which we were so honored to be able to show in Stitched in Sovereignty, is this piece, Ancestors. And just to give you an idea of the detail in this work, I tried to take a close-up kind of photo of it. So for maybe some people in the audience who aren't as familiar with some of the techniques of beadworking, can you talk a little bit about the process, especially for making a work of this size, right? This is not your typical, we're not making a pair of earrings or a medallion here. So a full framed work of art. Can you explain a little bit about what that process looked like?
Absolutely. So this process really was just part of my processing my dad's illness and then him passing. So I really didn't have quite a plan 100% for how it was going to go. And it went a lot by feel. So I predominantly work with flat stitch. So that's what you see for the majority of this piece as well. But I tried to use different styles of bead, different textures, and then different fills, just to give it a more dynamic look and represent sort of the different stages of both life and sky world. So
here's a detail. Could you explain a little bit what you mean by flat stitch? Because we're going to talk about Shelby's technique here in a second, and I want to kind of describe the differences.
Absolutely. So flat stitch is the stitching of beads flat to your stabilizing material. So I will stitch down 4 beads, then I will come back up and refasten the 3rd and 4th bead, and that is essentially the process over and over and over again, in any direction or what have you. But that's how flat stitch. It's a quick breakdown of flat stitch.
So it's a very labor intensive process, but with, I think, a result that's worth it in the end. And there, something that you mentioned in your video is that I really appreciated was that you don't necessarily always have to have happy thoughts as you're working, but it can be about the processing of emotions. And there's something about that repetition and that focusing on, and Shelby mentioned this as well, focusing on what you're doing in front of you, that really does have, maybe you don't even realize it in the moment, but does have kind of some healing qualities, because it focuses you to be there, to be in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, a lot of people talk about this and the idea of beadwork as medicine, and sort of exactly the grounding and meditative quality of it. Almost, it allows you to open and reflect on other things. I find sometimes too, my mind is just clearer and more open, because that's all you really can do, is be grounded and focused in the detail of what you're doing.
And so when you said you started this piece and kind of went with the flow, is that how you normally work, or do you have things very planned out typically?
I am normally more of a go with the flow sort of person. I will create a design for a piece, but then the beads might take me in one particular direction or another. And then I'm getting better at planning different series and doing things like that. But for the most part, if something really calls to me, that's what I'm doing next. And the moon and space in general have been a large theme throughout all of the work that I've done. So this was a really exciting piece to take on and to complete.
I was so excited to see you start it. So for those of you who don't yet follow Brit on Instagram, I highly recommend it. Blue Hummingbird beadwork. And so I had admired your work for quite a while. And when you started this piece, Brit would just post like little snapshots, little close-up details of it, so you couldn't see the whole thing as she was working on it. And it was this amazing, there's something about the connections that we make across social media. And I know this might be kind of a cliche discussion to have, but I think it speaks really well to our formations of community and the way that community can be kind of reimagined, as time goes on. And seeing your process over social media was, for me, I think a lot of people who admire your work from afar on the internet, it does create a sense of connection, right? And an investment in your process and in your work. And so Brit's other piece in this show is the lunar phases or moon phases medallion, which I think is more akin to what you work on pretty commonly. These medallions are kind of your bread and butter a little bit.
That is the phrase that comes to mind. Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was gonna say, I love them so much because of my personal connection to the moon, and also like just no two moons are exactly the same night after night. So I can make moon phase pieces forever and ever. And in the same way that no two beading pieces are identical and they're always unique, it's always a really fun challenge to make them just that much more different.
So one of the things that I've been really interested in is the way that beadwork can communicate kind of ancestral or intergenerational knowledge or stories, things that are so kind of clearly woven into the stitches of beadwork, right, is knowledge. And you provided a couple really beautiful stories when you shared these works initially. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of those narratives that you addressed about the sky, especially about the night sky, and maybe some Haudenosaunee cultural narratives.
So specifically in this particular instance with this one that I was thinking of, I can share a little bit that it's a story I'd heard that related specifically to my infertility journey. And it was around a community auntie who the first full moon was her hand drum, that she had played her drum and cried she'd spent her whole life dedicated to community and hadn't had any children of her own. So sorry, I'm nervous and I've got it backwards. Cried and cried, and the moon came down and became the first hand drum. So these are every phase, every regeneration, as I was venturing on this journey, and it's been very hard and very painful in a lot of ways. I found a lot of solace and comfort in Grandmother Moon's cycles specifically, and the repetition, the certainty, the regeneration, the connection. I just felt very, very linked to that.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that leads kind of well into, I'm not trying to rush, but I want to make sure we leave time for audience questions as well. But I think that's a really great segue into what Shelby was discussing in her video about this idea of individual glass beads, which I think are a really beautiful metaphor that you made for taking something that might be broken, right, or shards of something, and weaving them back together, right? And so they may never be exactly as they were before. They may never be perfect, but they are something new. They're something regenerated and reborn into something new. And that really speaks to me with this butterfly piece for the obvious kind of connections with metamorphosis and rebirth and all of that. But I'm wondering, Shelby, if you can explain a little bit to our audience. So Shelby's work, compared to the other artists in the show, is unique in that she does not do applique. The pieces in the show are not applique. And you can kind of see this piece in particular, Large Butterfly, is actually positioned as if it's a pinned specimen, almost like like a real butterfly that's pinned to a board. So I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit the process of how that loom beadwork is made.
Yeah, and this one I actually did brick stitch. The other one I did on the loom. But yeah, so this one, there's a stitch called brick stitch. Oh, we can do loom. Like,
sorry.
That's all right. It's like, I like talking about both of them. But so with the brick stitch, it's a stitch that a lot of people, in fact, the person who showed me how to do it, like makes earrings and things like that. And so taught me how to make like this little tiny triangle. And I was like, thanks. And I went home and then I made this huge thing with it. And she was like, well, of course you did. But I like on this stitch because you have the freedom to make different shapes. I practiced a few times with flat stitch. And so I just laugh. Like, no one was there to tell me that I wasn't doing it right. When I was teaching myself how to bead, I was like, well, this just works for me. So on that, I would say anyone, like however you can make that art, never judge yourself by if you're doing it right or doing it wrong. Just, can you express what you're thinking about in that thought? And so for me, like I was listening to Brent, man, I wish I could be, a little more creative, but I need a pattern. And so like I will play around online with software and create a pattern. And I had found a picture, of this butterfly. I knew I wanted to do a bigger butterfly. I had done a piece the year before of a butterfly woman, and I needed smaller butterflies to match the scale of the woman, but I really liked making those butterflies. And then for Chelsea and I, our tribes, I'm Chickasaw, she's Choctaw, and we have a lot of similar cultural roots. In fact, our tribes are with two brothers who disagreed on what creator wanted them to do, and half the tribe went with Choctaw and half the tribe went with Chickasaw. And so a lot of things are similar, and butterflies are really symbolic for us of resilience, strength, beauty, and grace of our women. And I think with the beadwork and making, this butterfly, I'm thinking that many times of all of the little pieces that, either a thing or a person or a whole group of people, our tribes, shattered, unrecognizable, and then but put back together, a metamorphosis. Our cultures, our families, are different than they were pre-colonization, different than they were pre-removal. You know, as Brit mentioned in her video, that, you know, up until 1978, our practices and teaching and ways were illegal in the United States. But yet, you know, right now I see in Oklahoma and everywhere this big renaissance of Indigenous art. All of us little kids in the 70s and 80s were able to start creating. And so I see a lot of beauty and love seeing that rebirth of culture. There's a group like Thrive Unlimited, they do a lot of work with kids, and they talk about, you know, we are the new tradition. All the traditions that our people had before relocation, some of them were new, and to give us permission and to step into our own. And I do believe, you know, for us, there wasn't a linear time, and our ancestors are with us. And I do spend time with my ancestors when I'm beading. I was over my grandmother's. In the video, I loved it. It gave me goosebumps again, you know, with the Hatchet Woman. We'll look at when I finished her on the loom, I knew the whole time I was making her, like I was talking to my ancestors, because our women, our Chickasaw women, we had women that were warriors. And my family, we were part of a red clan. Like the white clan were peaceful, diplomatic. The red clans were more where warriors came from. I mean, there was no hard and fast. There were warriors on both sides. So, but we were from one of the warring clans. So I thought, well, we were probably much more likely to be Hatchet Women. And we have stories of our women, you know, the French wrote about us, that they had come to, you know, burn the village and kill the women and children. And our women just grabbed their hatchets and started singing war songs and slaughtered the French troops. And, you know, on social media the past couple of years, there's been so much attention, as there needs to be, on our missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it got to where it was so heavy for me to log on to Facebook or Instagram, because like, I can't, you know, I'm stopping this and I'm just sitting and crying for all of these dead women, all of these women. And so I started thinking about our Hatchet Women. I'm like, I need personally to spend time focused on our strength. My niece was going through a big transition in her life, and she's so fierce, and I'm so proud of her. She's such a resilient person. That's why I asked her if she would pose and be my model for this. And I sent her pictures of, here's some pictures of how our ancestors did, you know, it was facial tattoos. They went in full commitment. I didn't make her do a full commitment of getting her face tattooed, although she probably would. And so she goes, well, what exactly do you want me to do? I said, do whatever you feel led to do. Like, here's some different patterns, here's some symbols, but I want you to do. And so this is how she, you know, marked herself. I mailed her some little toy hatchets, and because I knew that we could fix that. And I got, she sent me like 6 pictures. Her friend took pictures of her up against a wall. And I have a friend that's a graphic artist. I was like, put this in sepia tones, you know, and really bring out the contrast. And I was really happy. And then, yeah, playing around with the patterns. But yeah, when I was finished her and she was still on the loom, I knew in my heart I had to take her to meet our grandmother. You know, my ancestor, her grave is down in Colbert, Oklahoma. And on her grave grows a giant cedar tree. And, you know, cedar is healing for prayers. And so I go and visit her tree a few times a year. And I knew that I needed to take, you know, this is my niece Hannah. I was like, I needed to take Hannah. And I needed to show, you know, I needed to introduce this generation of strong Chickasaw women to my relative who relocated as an orphan during forced removal as a little girl. You know, who had lost both her parents. And yeah, and so that, and I'd kind of forgotten that I'd shared that picture with you, but yeah, of taking her there. So my pieces are all very spiritual. They all have their own energy. Some of them are really happy energy, and I love, and other ones, I just have to sit and cry with them, that there's just a sad energy. But This one felt really good. The butterfly, the two pieces that that you guys, that I shared with you. But yeah, so Her I did on the loom, which it's a similar stitch that people do hat bands and bracelets.
Mhm.
I'm a little extra. I've got a giant loom. And so she's like 8 inches by 10 inches, but I do much larger loom pieces than what most people do on the loom. But I love doing portraits. I think that just because of how my brain works, I bead more like a mosaic artist where I'm going row by row, and that's how I'm thinking about the project, and not so much like other artists like Brit and others. It's like they're painting with the beads. That's not how my brain works, but my brain works like this. So I can have my image, break it down into pixels, and then I have to trust my judgment, which can be hard. That I'll get started like, I don't think this looks right. I don't think this looks right at all, because I'm looking at it up really close. And then I'll step back and look at it the next morning, and I'm like, yes, that's a perfect contrast. Where I'll be working on it going, this just not, I made a mistake. And where it'd be easy at the last minute to go scratch out and change my pattern. If I can just stick with it, usually I knew what I was thinking when I made my pattern, but it's easy to doubt myself when I get halfway through.
Beading is definitely a trust exercise. Learning to trust yourself and to trust the process and the result, I find. So for our audience, you know, with loom beading, you set up the strings. I forget what the warp and the weft are. I can never.
So I was like, I just set it up. I think someone else told me. I was like, yeah, that's the warp, I think. But so you have the strings, or I was like, I don't know what it's called. I just know how to do it. But that go over the loom. In fact, through the magic, I've got a piece on the loom right now. So.
And it really literally is weaving, the same kind of idea as weaving a textile. Oh yeah.
So it's, you have the threads going this way, and then you go back and forth with the rows, and one string underneath with the beads, and then one on top of the warp that you've run through to lock them in place. And so, I can do about, depending on the finish of the beads, some beads are really rough, and so they stick together and they're a little harder to come through. But I can set like 20 to 30 beads at a time.
Wow.
Whereas when you do brick stitch, you're doing one at a time. But yeah, and then it's just like reading. My pattern assigns like letters. And so it is like I'm learning a new language, because the letter sample. So I was like, this is my language lesson. So I know, looking at my pattern, I can be like, oh, that's that dark shimmery metallic purple. I was like, E is purple and this is that color. And so, yeah, each piece comes with its own language.
It's like having to use both sides of your brain at the same time. I don't.
Yeah, and I can't listen to podcasts or watch TV. I just listen to music and just tune out and spend time with my beads.
I love that. Well, it's 10 after, so let's, I want to give our audience the chance to ask some questions. So I'm going to see what we have here. Let's see. For both panelists, this is a good question. Can you talk about patterns, if there are patterns across your artworks that connect different works that you make? Are there things that recur across certain pieces?
I'll let you answer first.
Sure. Yeah, for me, as far as in my style, I'm really heavily influenced by North American traditional tattoo sort of styles. So there's usually a bold black outline in a lot of my work. I very rarely don't have black in a piece. And I do, that is also, I'm a cosmetic tattoo artist by profession as well, but equally weighted with my beadwork. So I think that's probably the thing that flows through mine.
So I really like doing portraits. And I think, you know, if you visit my website and look, I really like beading portraits. I like beading pictures. Some of my favorite pieces to do, some of my hardest pieces to do, have been pictures of people's ancestors. People will say, hey, will you bead? And that is just such a cool experience to spend that time with their ancestors. There was this one sweet lady, lives in Canada. She's a screenwriter and stuff. And she sent me a picture of her ancestor who he had for their people. He went to talk to the King of Spain. He went and talked, you know, in England to the Queen, the King and Queen, because he was fighting for their sovereignty and he had traveled the world. And she kept this picture of him like in her entryway, this old black and white picture. And so she goes, I want to carry him with me. So I want him on a cuff that I can wear, you know, so he can go and still fight for our people with me. And I know making it that he heard her and he was so excited. Like that was just like, he was just like, thank you very much. I need to get to my granddaughter. And it was just the energy of that piece. And I wrote her a little note with it. And I was like, you know, you can think I'm weird or whatever, but I know he is so proud of you. He was, yeah, because it was just such an easy piece to do. Yeah, the energy of that piece. But I like doing people. I really like doing women. I like trying to capture the fierce, strong, but fragile. You know, like with the Hatchet Woman, she looks really fierce, but if you pay attention, she's got a very defensive posturing. She's not on the attack, but you're not going to get past her. And I did another one that both the Hatchet Woman, when she comes home from Couse, her and another, I did a Druid priestess, because my other lineage would be Irish, Welsh, and Scottish. And we don't think about the tribes of the British Isles before the Roman Catholic Church. And a lot of their practices, when I lived in New York City, one of my friends, her family, much more recent immigrant from Ireland than my family, and about trying to connect and what were the Celtic teachings, and different things of the drummings and the ceremonies around the cycles of the moon and all these different things. I was like, this is so much like, you know, our cultures. And so two really fierce women that look fragile. You know, on her, she looks fierce, but her eyes look like she's been crying. She's got blue eyes, she's got a crown. She looks like a badass, like my Hatchet Woman. But then I left the threads on the top to leave her vulnerable. Like I didn't, you know, with the loom projects, you've got to tie lots of little knots on the top and bottom to hold the beads in place. It keeps it secure. And with her, I left the top. I didn't tie the knots on the top. Left it for that symbolism. But yeah, I like doing, you know, expressing the fierce and fragile. And at some point, I have been applying for, so I'll throw it out in the universe for a different artist fellowship, because I really want to do a whole series of Native women, of modern women warriors, because we need images of strength and power, because we are, and I think we need to be reminded of that. So yes, I like our strong, fierce women, and I like beating them.
Well, I have a feeling that idea will be well received. I have to mention that Shelby, the 21st century Hatchet Woman, she won 2 awards at the Southeastern Art Show and Market, CSAM, here in Oklahoma. The Judges Award, right? Judges and People's Choice Award. So I think it's a good bet that you'll get some support. Hopefully, let's keep our fingers crossed to do a series about Native women. Oh,
yeah,
man.
like I really want to do, the two, like that, and the other is I'm really drawn to the sacred power of Two-Spirit people. I'm working on a big piece right now that will be a Two-Spirit healer. that's Anishinaabe, and someone like told me their story and what they do and sent me a picture of them in the regalia, and I was like, I'm gonna have to bead this, and got permission, but it's gonna be the biggest piece I've ever done. But yeah, I'm capturing the spiritual power of our two-spirit people, that they tried really hard to eliminate them because they didn't want that to be a narrative. So yeah, between our women and our two-spirit, that's probably going to motivate the main part of my work for the next several years. I mean, other than little side whimsical pieces and commissions, I'll be focused on capturing our women and two-spirit beautiful souls.
I'm excited to see that. So this question we had actually for our artist yesterday, and it's so good. We're going to ask both of you again. So for both of you, if you could spend a day with one person, living or past, getting tips or techniques on beadwork, or to ask them about pieces they've made, who would it be and why?
This is always so hard. Like even there are so many. Like Shelby, I'd love to hang out with you for a day. And like,
I'd love to hang out with you. Too bad we couldn't go to Taos. Like I'm like a total fangirl. Right? Follow all your stuff.
And same. That's what I mean. Everyone's techniques are so unique and interesting. But the first person that pops into my head is Jamie Okuma. I can't say in any way that our work is similar. However, the way that she weaves tradition and modern imagery and innovation, I just is absolutely incredible. And the way that she can make the one of a kind handbags and footwear, like it just, everything blows my mind. I don't know what she can't do with her textiles now and everything else. So I guess that's my answer.
So for our audience members, if you're not familiar with Jamie Okuma, do yourself a favor. Michelle just posted her website in our chat, and just to give you a little flavor of what she does. She is, one of her most famous pieces is an over-the-knee pair of Christian Louboutin boots that she has fully beaded, toe to top of the knee. And I imagine they have to be so heavy. That's glass, you know, these are glass beads on leather boots. They have to be so heavy, but her work is phenomenal, you know.
And I have to say too that when we were talking, or when you were mentioning earlier about the connectivity of being online in this really interesting time that we're in, I feel especially connected to folks in the online and specifically Instagram beadwork community. It's incredibly supportive, and I'm mentioning it again because Jamie has commented on a number of my posts. She's shared my work. And it feels like a movie star. So like to even be on her radar is just bananas. So she's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And that is one thing that I feel like every time I see an Indigenous artist that I've been admiring and loving for so long, and they are lifting up other artists, I'm like, this is what it's all about, right? Like this is, I think, aside from creating, I think that we're all here really to support and lift each other up. And so when I see stuff like that, I'm like, we're getting it done, especially, no offense, but especially the Indigenous women.
Well, it's so hard to monetize such a spiritually and culturally significant thing. So I think that is really what puts us apart in that area, is the way that we do really support and uplift each other.
Yeah, that's great. Shelby, did you have an idea to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in the Jamie Okuma camp. Her stuff always just blows my mind. But yeah, I mean, there's so many levels of, there's like, yes. And it's so noticeable no matter what it is. Like you said, you're like, that's a Jamie Okuma piece. And I love her style. On Instagram, so other people that I really like, and I'm like blanking on his first name, but I know like on Instagram, like, I know it's like, oh, Brody Sanchez. That was like Shoshone Sanchez. Oh. Brody's medallions are pristine. Like they are perfection of the beads, of looking. And so I've always, you know, no matter what the image is, his technique is pristine. Like I am always just in awe of his. And then, yeah, like Brit, your stuff, like anytime it comes across my feed and I see like the moons and everything. And so at first it's like, oh, that's similar to, you know, to that one person's work and other stuff. But I don't know if the other art, I think that they are, because I know a lot of painters here, but I do see a unique camaraderie between different bead artists. Like, you know, when I went in 2019, it was my first Santa Fe Indian art market. And of course, that was my very first art market ever. And so I laughed at myself like that morning going, Shelby, why did you pick this for your first market? Like, why didn't you do like a little local one?
Deep end, right in the deep end.
Like, no, just go big or go home. But I was really intimidated by the other artists. And this really sweet guy, collector, came to my booth. He was like, oh, you know, I'm so glad that you're here. And took me over and he goes, oh, have you met, you know, Jackie Bread? Her piece won Best of Show that year. And he goes, well, let me just walk you over there. And he just like walked me over, and she was sweet as can be. And I don't know if it's because we know how much time and love and energy goes into our pieces, that there is, I don't sense that competition. Like there is that like real appreciation and beauty for each other's work. And I do see that sincere rooting for each other that I don't know. I have friends that are painters, and I don't think they're as nice as us bead artists to each other. But there seems to be a little more competition, where I'm thrilled to see. And I think it's because we all have such unique styles. Mm-hmm. And someone else, like if someone else wants to be as nerdy as me and sit and make a 10 by 12 bead picture, more power to, because someone's like, my son was like, Mom, eventually someone's going to learn how to bead like you do. And I'm like, won't that be cool? Like, that would be awesome.
Right? I love that so much. And that's just it. Like I've been beading for 8 years, and I would be beading for the very first day, beading in your style. Like it's so different from mine. So it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can't, one of these days, I have a friend that she's like, can you make me a medallion? I'm like, no. I'm like, do you want a beaded portrait of your kid? My kid was like, I can't do a simple little medallion. Like I can't, it'll look like a 9-year-old did it. But
it's different. It's totally different. So I get that. Yeah.
Well, I think there's really something to be said. And again, our viewers who were with us last night will remember a little bit. We had a conversation about this, about the connectivity and the community that beadworking, even within families, right? Like that for so long, even the aesthetic kind of traditions that preceded beadwork in a lot of our communities were about that transmission of knowledge and that building of community, where you would sit around and you would bead with one another, and you'd have your grandmas and your aunties and, you know, people sitting around your table in your kitchen. And that's, you know, for a long time, that is how most beadworkers would learn, is through that kind of person-to-person transmission. And that's, I think, what I'm so excited about to see on social media. I mean, Brody Sanchez has just started doing this, where he'll just sit and while he's beading, and he'll just have a Facebook Live going. I mean, for like 2 hours, right? And he just sits there so that people can hop on and off and see his process. And that sharing just of the act of beading, right? And I think that is the best way, even if it's not directly teaching people, I think that is the best way to share that, all of that good energy, right, that can come out of the process of beading. I think that social media only amplifies that, you know, even more.
It's been really so good.
Yeah, and I agree. And then for some of us, you know, like for me and Elizabeth, Brit, we didn't grow up surrounded, you know, by our culture and communities. And so certain traditional pieces of not feeling like, even like going like, I feel appropriating my own culture because I don't know how to do, like someone gave me some moccasins, like, oh, you can bead these. And I was like, no, I can't. Like, I don't feel but so doing the more modern traditional, like I do feel very grounded in doing it because I am a modern Indigenous woman living in an urban space. I will totally steal the phrase, diaspora on your own lands. It's like, no, we intentionally weren't allowed to grow up around our people and our culture. And so that's coming out in so much art. Like I love, my stuff is nothing like his, but I love the artist Stephen Paul Judd, very modern, Bunky Echo Hawk. It's like, how do you take things that, and a kid growing up in modern culture that's native and insert that into it? I love it. Yeah, because that feels much more at home to me than a very traditional thing, because that just creates for me that internal longing and shame because I never had that.
Yeah, I really feel connected to what you're saying. And it's, for me, my work is all about authenticity. And because I didn't grow up with that, a lot of that doesn't connect to me specifically. And there are many other people who are more suited to that. So yeah, I really can relate to that feeling. And I know something that's come up a lot, I think recently in talking about beadwork, that I've only recently been able to name, but is that longing when folks talk about like their great grandmother's patterns and things like this that I don't have access to. But the power in planting seeds, the power in creating those blueprints for future generations. And this ties into what you were saying too, Chelsea, with the purpose of beading circles in the first place, and that sharing and transmission of knowledge. One of the most rewarding things I can ever do is when I bead with my 10-year-old niece, because the things that I didn't have growing up, the things I longed for, she's never, ever had to question. And we sit and we have these conversations and we share these teachings, and it's organic, and it just is for her. And so just sort of recognizing that, everyone has so much beauty and strength in their journey, and so that I'm making these patterns and I'm the first, that's powerful too.
I love this idea too of creating new traditions, right? Like all traditions at some point were new. They haven't always existed. And that really the function of a tradition is to sustain our people, right? And so when do we and how do we start imagining new traditions to move forward for those new generations, like your niece? And yeah, I love that. I think that's great. Well, we are coming up right on, I guess it's 6:30 Mountain Time, 7:30 my time.
8:30 my time.
Oh my gosh. Is there anything else, I always am wanting to advocate for our artists. I highly recommend all of our audience members to go to their individual websites. Again, those are linked on the Stitched in Sovereignty website. And I also just plug that kind of a big component of this show that didn't fully come kind of physically into fruition the way we had imagined, but I think that we've adapted as best we could, is that a lot of the works in the show are in fact for sale. And I want to say that even after the show comes down and we send the pieces back to the artists, you can still purchase works typically directly from artists. So I encourage you to support as much as you can if you are able, even if it's just kind words to an artist. I think we could all use a little bit more support and love and encouragement right now these days. So give them as much love as you can, even after the show is down. So thank you both, Yakoki, Shelby, and Brit, for joining us tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Davison to sign us off.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Brit and Shelby, and thanks for sharing your time, expertise, but especially for sharing a piece of yourselves tonight with us. These talks have been phenomenal. I'm sorry we couldn't get you down to Taos, but hopefully at some point we can get you down to Taos and share the site with you. But thank you so much. And yeah, support Native art. Go to stitchedinsovereignty.org, check out the website, and then go visit the artists on their website. And please do help us support Native art. And thank you for all of you who joined us in the audience tonight. And we look forward to seeing you in Taos as well when it is safe to do so. So thank you, folks. Have a great night.
Thank you.